Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about how boards can help their company's digital strategy and transformation. And joining me is two people that would qualify as digital natives, and I'm happy to have them join us. First, welcome Tara Walpert Levy, who's a board member with Bloomin Brands and is also the current chair of the Advisory Council of Diligent and Spencer Stuart's Next Gen Board Leaders. And I'm happy to be associated with that as well. So welcome, Tara.
Thanks so much for having me, TK. It's great to be here.
And also joining is David Sable, who's a board member with American Eagle Outfitters. Welcome, David.
TK, thank you.
So this topic is really sort of near and dear to my heart because I sort of get the sense that with all the noise that happened this year, you know, if you had asked somebody 18 months ago, what's the most important thing? Everybody was touching on digital transformation. But then up comes the pandemic and social unrest and all the noise that happened. And it's interesting that boards did adapt. They learned how to do virtual things and whatever. And some boards that were ahead of the curve on the digital transformation knew how to reach customers in the pandemic, knew how to handle their situations. But again, there was a lot that didn't. And there's perfect examples of this. And I know you're familiar with, Tara, and that's one of them is Carvana, you know, the very online car retailer that has the cool car vending machines that you see. And they have the last 3 years, increased their valuation to $32 billion. Now, if you compare that online retailer to AutoNation, which is the biggest US car networks dealers, their valuation is $5.5 billion and hasn't changed in the last 5 years. It shows you the impact of digital. And another favorite for me is Booking.com. Now, Booking.com's valuation is $73 billion. $73 billion. That is bigger than the valuation of Hilton, Marriott, and Hyatt put together, combined. So it shows you how the digital has just made quantum leaps and how important it is for companies, regardless of what your industry is, to be aware and ahead of this curve. So somewhere in all that, the board of directors have the responsibilities, have this sort of oversight responsibility and make sure that companies are going in the right direction. So David, I'm going to start with you on sort of this issue of what is the board's role in making sure that keeping their company ahead of this digital transformation curve.
So what is the board's role? I think, first of all, you have to always remember, if you're a board member, you're about governance, not managing the company. And so I think sometimes that's a really big issue. But what is your governance role and what is your governance accountability for doing that? So I'm very proud. You mentioned a couple of companies. I'm on the board of American Eagle, as you said. We have come through this pandemic as probably, according to all the analysts, the number one specialty retailer in the country because the company has been on a digital transformation journey for a number of years. But what does that mean? First of all, I think as a board member, you have to understand the language. Being digital doesn't mean you dump everything that you have. So in our case, it doesn't mean that you stop and kill all your place-based retail. It means you understand the role of digital in reaching the customer. That's where you start. And what does that mean? So if you think about me as the customer, what are all the steps working backwards that are digital, because they all are, by the way, that will get me to order, to buy, and then have you be able to ship and fulfill and take back in the easiest way possible. So I think as a board member, what you have to understand is it's not just marketing. It's not just some digital guy they bring in and say he's in head charge of digital, but it's marketing, it's your HR, it's your finance, it is your logistics people. Digital crosses every single piece of your business. And you had better ask the right questions like, how do all these pieces knit together? Because the worst thing that happens, and we've seen it in a lot of companies, where everybody comes in with their siloed view of how digital works, and then somebody wakes up and says, well, wait a second, they're not talking. So if the company and you as the board insist on focusing on the end user, who's the customer, the buyer, the user, or whatever of your product, and work your way backwards, ask the questions all through. How does it connect? What are the pieces? How do these pieces work together? And show us the metrics and how the metrics work in each of these divisions to make that journey easier. And then I would throw on top of it all, you better know privacy, and you better be up on all the issues that relate to privacy. So again, my view is it's governance, but the governance is how do you make it all work together in the best and most efficient way to deliver to the end user?
So that is very thorough, David, and I think that you hit on some very good points. So now I want to turn to Tara. So Tara, I know in your day job at Google, you think about a lot about how companies have to think out of the box and grasp what successful companies are doing and how can they take advantage of that. So can you sort of give me some tools or some examples where companies might need to alter their traditional marketing mindset or ways to reach the customer, and what other advice would you have for board members to stay ahead of the curve as well?
Sure. I think it's been really interesting to see what's happened during COVID, because to your point, digital transformation was beginning to make its way into the boardroom in many companies, but maybe not as holistically and maybe not for everyone. And then, like with so many other things, COVID vastly accelerated that trend. And so board members, both from a mitigating risk and a ensuring the growth strategy was there, started to lean more into this topic. And one of the things that we saw was one of the biggest challenges was simply where to start. Because as David said, a holistic strategy is necessary in the end, but it can be very overwhelming. And the reality is that most digital transformations, I think the latest number from BCG is 70%, most of them fail. And so I think as board members, helping people to focus on what drives success, having a clear North Star, not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, and continuing to manage and track metrics that let you know how you're doing are key to that. So I'll give you a couple of examples that pop up for us on a regular basis and also have made a big difference for us at Bloomin Brands. One of the first ones is just making sure that you're thinking about marketing as a growth lever rather than a cost item on the budget, right? So traditionally, when marketing was not as accountable or not as trackable, it was largely viewed by a lot of boards and executive teams as a cost to be managed rather than a growth lever to track. And now that digital is fueling so much of the marketing and commerce, you have a much greater ability to see, optimize, and build sales consistently throughout the process, which is why you're seeing more and more teams of marketers and CFOs showing up in the boardroom, and that's critical. Another area I'd say is, people are obsessed with data, and that's a good thing, except when they're drowning in it. And so helping to figure out what are the 1 or 2 or 3 insights out of all that data that are really going to move your company is key. So for example, it might be that using lifetime value to determine your marketing strategy can radically change your sales and profitability. Right? It might be that you see something in how people are behaving that is going to change where and how you market. So I think one of the hotel chains saw that the number of flights getting canceled during COVID was off the charts, and they developed a marketing campaign entirely around that. That wasn't that extensive, comprehensive, and 360 view of the customer. It was one data point that mattered. So making sure you're using smart data quickly versus trying to wait till you have full comprehensive experience. The last thing I'd offer, and again, I think this is key for board members, especially those that don't feel as comfortable in digital from an infrastructure or development standpoint, is simply to be the customer, right? You referenced Carvana. Compare what it's like to get a car from Tesla, right? Where you can research, book, buy, and get scheduled delivery on the whole thing inside of 10 minutes online versus more traditional dealers. And you might say like, well, that's Tesla, but actually a lot of folks like Carvana are following that path. And so I think as a board member, simply experiencing how your company shows up online and across channels can stimulate a lot of great questions like David is describing. And so if you knit those together and agree on what the North Star and key metrics are and are reviewing them in every board member meeting, no differently than you would review regular financial or operational data, I think you'll be in good shape.
Can I just add one little piece of that? So, and actually, I'm just going to build on it because I think that what Tara said, I hope everybody paid attention to the marketing piece because it's so critical. But the notion of data, finding that point of data, the one point data, that whole sea. So you've gunked up your servers with everything because you can, but finding the one thing that's important, the insight, and then the focus on the customer. That is called marketing. And I think that is the greatest thing that I've discovered over the past couple of years is that companies have understood again, or it's the better companies starting to understand that marketing is marketing. And all the data in the world and all the digital knowledge, all the things that we add to it very often just confuse us and obfuscate, as opposed to understanding that they're there to enable and to help us market better. But there's still this thing called marketing, which is an absolute. It's a practice. It's a state of mind that needs to be thought of. So I think that was awesome, Tara.
So Tara, do you see people sort of readjusting how they spend their marketing dollars? I know that I read where the U.S. Navy had switched in their recruitment process from television to reaching out through social media channels and significantly increased the success of their recruitment. So are you seeing that across the board where companies are saying, okay, I've got to move money to where I'm reaching today's customer and making those changes, and then rethinking, like you said, to say, this is not an expense, this is a growth development tool?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was a trend that existed prior to the pandemic, but it's been accelerated tenfold over the last 12 months because that was the only place in many cases to drive commerce and a better place to connect with people. The other thing to think about is that it both allows you to be more accountable in how you drive sales with your spend, but digital also allows you to manage for the bottom line much more effectively, right? Because you can typically set some kind of parameters around what profit you need to make on any lead or sale or whatever it is that's coming through the door in many aspects of digital. And so if you think about what had to happen over the last 12 months in terms of managing liquidity, right, and managing risk, that was an enormous advantage for all of the digital players. And I think you saw that the customers who really leaned into that benefited disproportionately. And you certainly saw it in the market reports of all the digital sellers.
So the Navy, just a thought, the Navy is a very good example of this. Navy was my account. And to Google's credit, the entire digital transformation began with Google. But it didn't begin as you would think. It began with Google giving us insight into how the meaning the recruits who might be most interested in actually signing up, where they were and the questions that they were asking. So it wasn't as much about the digital, oh my God, but it gave us insight. So we knew what they were looking for. We knew the things that were interesting to them. We then created the kinds of assets that would answer the questions that they were looking at. And there's some of them are spectacular. And then we put them through the media where these younger people were, which of course was digital. But it's so fascinating that it all started with Google as an insight generator, not as a data source.
Well, it's certainly makes perfect sense to think about why you would move to be able to reach the customers. So we only have a minute or two left, but I don't want to let you guys go before I ask you the tough question. And that is, so let's just assume that you're a board member and you're sitting on the board of a company that is not thinking this way, meaning that they are behind the curve already, and your fellow board members and management aren't hearing you or seeing that you have any kind of problem with this and you're falling further behind, what do you do as a board member? And David, I'll start with you on this.
Other than cry, I think what you have to do is very simple. You just bring to the table the companies that have managed the transition and are managing the transformation in the best and smartest ways. And Carvana is certainly a great example of that. And and as we all know, very often with boards, the best way to get their attention is to talk about ridiculous valuations. And so you start talking that and they look at the valuation that they have, trust me, people pay attention. The worst thing, by the way, and I won't mention names because it's not fair, but very often you see that when companies start talking about digital transformation, particularly around marketing, they bring in the social media people to talk to you as if that's digital transformation. It's not. That's as bad as bringing in ABC to tell you how to place advertising. It's the exact same thing. Don't listen. That's not where you start. That's where you end.
Tara?
I would echo what David is saying, and I think I'd build on it to say there's both the highlighting the examples and showing people what's possible and also giving a little bit of a nudge of what's going to happen if we don't meet possibility. But there's also the how that needs to follow it. And oftentimes I find people are a little bit dragging their feet because they don't know what comes after the acknowledgement that they need to move on it. And so connecting people with the management teams of those companies that have done it offline, particularly the C-suite of your company, can be incredibly beneficial. I mean, just in the past, couple of months alone, there have been different connections we've made with the CMO and CFO at Best Buy, with the CMO and CFO at Invisalign, which actually, despite requiring some recommendation from a dentist, in the last 12 months has literally doubled their market cap because of their lean into digital transformation. Those conversations have made a world of difference, both for the urgency that I think different companies feel and also for their confidence in what it will take to go after it.
Well, I'm hoping that all of this will certainly pick up, as the other noise starts to dissipate and we can once again refocus companies on the digital transformation. We want, when you look at the top 20, it's always amazing, the top 20 largest companies, it's always amazing to see in 5 years how many disappear off that list. And I'm just afraid that there's going to be a direct correlation between companies that manage this well and companies that haven't, and who ends up on that list. So I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us. This is obviously, again, a topic dear to my heart, and it's a pleasure to have you both take the time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, TK, and it's great to see this conversation get the spotlight. It is important.
So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.